Yevamos Daf continues the Gemara's discussion about what happens when you have an unsure status of a child. You're confused, you don't know who he is. The first half of the Daf will continue the Gemara's discussion about the case where children were confused at birth. We don't know who's the son of whom. And we're talking about we don't know if one is a Kohen or a Yisrael. Then we'll get to our Mishnah, which will introduce a similar type of situation. But here it's where we had a woman who had two husbands and we don't know which one the child is from. Could also there have an issue of we don't know whether the child is a Yisrael or a Kohen. Now, the Gemara begins the daf discussing a list of 10 people who are not allowed to receive Truma. More will sidestep into a number of other sugyas. The end of the daf will discuss a Gzeira D'Rabbanan, potentially, that a person has to know who his father is in order to do the avodah as a Kohen, even if he knows he's a Kohen for sure. It's not good enough, he has to know specifically who his father is. So let's begin. We're starting a few lines into the daf. The Gemara has just presented a brisa with a list of 10 people who you don't give Truma. And it said that on those lists there are only two that you do not even allow them to feed Truma to their families. You don't send Truma to their homes. So all 10 you don't give them themselves Truma at the granary. 2 of the 10 you don't even send it to their homes, and that is someone who is Matami, a Kohen who becomes Tameh, and someone who marries a woman that he's not allowed to marry because of his kahuna. Both of these are a Kanas. One who married a woman who was Asur to obviously broke the halacha. The one who becomes a Tameh was careless. You should have been more careful and not become tameh. So the Gemara says, how is it different than somebody who doesn't have a bris milah? A Kohen should have a bris milah. Obviously, we're talking about a case where the guy was an onus. He couldn't have a bris milah because his brothers died because of the milah, and therefore he's not allowed to have it. So tameh is also an onus. He didn't become tameh on purpose necessarily. So the Gemara says, what's the difference between the two? Both are onsin. The Gemara explains, not being able to have a bris milah is a complete onus. There's literally nothing he could do about it, but he could have avoided becoming tameh had he been more careful. Now, the Gemara says, we have a brisa that says as follows, a strange wording, which the Gemara will clear up. It says, an Eved and a woman, assuming that they are from the family of a Kohanim, we don't give them Truma at the granary, and when we do give them Truma, we give the woman first, and we let her go home right away. So the Gemara says that doesn't make any sense. First you tell me you don't give her, then you tell me you do give her. Gemara says when we say we do give her, we're not talking about Truma anymore, we're talking about Meiser Ani. That is, if you have a woman and someone else waiting in line to receive Meiser Ani, you give the woman first. It's considered to be degrading for her to have to stand on line. Therefore, you send her home right away. Says Rava, based on that, whenever two people would come to me for a din at Torah, not with each other, separately, each one had a case to be heard. One was a man and one was a woman. So I used to take the man first because he's mechuyev in mitzvahs and he would need to resolve his mitzvah issue first. But then I heard this halacha, I started taking the woman first because it's a zilusa, it's degrading for her to have to stand and wait. Okay, now the Gemara refers back to the Mishnah. There we had seen we have two children and confused. One of them is the Kohen and one is the Eved of that Kohen. So we said that if they free each other, then we do not have a suffix of Kohen or Eved, we have a suffix of Kohen or Yisrael. Says Gemara, you said if they free each other, as if it's up to them to decide. Shouldn't we force them to free each other because they can't marry anybody? Each one has a suffix Eved, suffix kosher. Not allowed to marry a shevcha, not allowed to marry a bas chorin. So Gemara says, you're right, we do force them. And that's what we mean to say. We force them to free each other, and then they have the status of a suffix Kohen, suffix Yisrael. Now, next, the Mishnah concluded and said we give them the chumras of being a Kohen and the chumras of being a Yisrael. The Gemara says this is referring to their carbon mincha. The halacha is that a Kohen who brings the carbon mincha is a special mincha that he brings. The mincha of a Kohen is like an ola. It's completely burned, none of it is eaten, and there is no kmitza. There's no separation of it because it all goes into the fire. The mincha of a Yisrael, however, has a kmitza. Kmitza is like the shchita of the carbon mincha. You take part off, that part gets burned, that's like the emurim that goes in the fire, and the rest of it is eaten by the kohanim. So here you have a suffix kohen, suffix Yisrael, so their carbon mincha has to have a kmitza just in case of Yisrael, but none of it can be eaten just in case he is a kohen. So what do you do with it? So the Gemara says you burn it separately. It goes into the fire separately from the kmitza. So the Gemara asks, how could you? On the tzad that it's not meant to be burned, on the tzad that he's a Yisrael, you cannot burn things which aren't chayev haktara. You cannot be maktir things which don't get haktara. That's forbidden. The Gemara quotes a source for that it's an iser. It says, Kol mimenu leishim harehu bebal taktiru. Anything that was not meant to be burned has an iser bal taktiru. So Gemara says, so what you do is, like what Yehuda ben Shimon ben Pazi said, you use it as firewood. You put it in the fire and you say, look, on the tzad that it's not meant to be burned, it's firewood. We're using it to burn other things. And this is And Eitzah we've seen before was given by Rabbi Elazar in a brisa discussing where you have a mingling of limbs of karbanos with limbs that are not karbanos. Now you don't know what am I supposed to do here. Some of these are supposed to go in the fire as karbanos, some aren't. So you put them all in the fire and you say the ones which are supposed to be karbanos are being maktir, that's a haktara. The ones which aren't is just being used as fuel for the fire. That's firewood. So Umar says that's good according to Rabbi Elazar's opinion that you could do that, but the Rabbanan there hold that you can't do that. That Eitzah doesn't work. So what are you supposed to do here with this carbon mincha? What do you do with the rest of the carbon mincha besides the kmitza? You don't know if you're supposed to burn it or not. So when it says you do like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon is discussing something else. He's discussing when a kohen is chayav a type of carbon mincha that a Yisrael would bring. So there you have a machakas between Rabbi Elazar, Reb Shimon, and the Rabbanan as to what you do with the rest of that carbon mincha. That carbon mincha, even though he's a kohen, because it's a Yisrael's carbon mincha, you do a kmitza, you burn the kmitza. The rest of it is a machokas there. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says you scatter the flour of the rest of the carbon mincha on the base hadeshen, on the place where you put the ashes. Now, the Rabbanan over there argue, they disagree. In that case, is specifically referring to a minchas chotei. They argue because they say that you could burn it. Over here where you can't burn it, so they would agree with Reb Shimon's eitzah, and they would say that you could sprinkle the rest of it on the base hadeshen, and therefore that's what they would say you do in this scenario here. Okay, this concludes the Gemara on the previous Mishnah. Now we start the next Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses a different type of situation where you have a suffix. That's a woman who had a husband. She somehow lost him. The Gemara will clarify what happened to him. Then she gets another husband, and she did not wait the required 3 months between the two husbands, which would enable us to tell the son that's born, is he from the first husband or from the second husband. She got remarried right away. Now a child's born, and we don't know if he's from the first husband or from the second husband. Could be that even if he was born that he was born 7 months after her remarriage, and therefore he could be a seventh mold. He could be a child who's born after a 7th month pregnancy to her second husband, or he could be a child from a 9-month pregnancy to her first husband. Either way, we don't know. We don't know who the father is. So the first question the Gemara will discuss is what do you do about chalitza? And that's if he dies without kids, what happens to his wife? And if he has brothers from the first husband or from the second husband, what do you do there? So the simplest case here is that we have a suffix whether he shares a father with the brothers of the first husband, with his brothers, with the sons of the first husband, or with the sons of the second husband. However, he definitely shares a mother with all of them. Since he shares a mother with all of them, there's definitely an Isser Eishes Ach. There's no way he could just be Machmir and marry the woman. The only way that he'll be Mutter, or that they'll be Mutter, in his wife, or their wives, is if there's a Heter of Yibum. Now, since we don't know if there is a Heter of Yibum or not. We don't know who his brothers are from the father. Yibum, again, only refers to a situation from the father. So, therefore, chalitza is required in all situations. So, therefore, whether he dies without kids or they die without kids, either way, chalitza has to be done. You can't possibly do Yibum because you don't know if they're a brother from the father or not, and if there's a heter of chalitza. Now, what happens, though, if he has the sons of the two potential fathers, they both have kids born from a different woman. So that means that there's no vadai eshes ach. For sons that are born from a different woman, he may be their brother through the father. He's the brother through the father of one of them, or he may have no relationship to them at all. So here you have a simpler situation. You don't have to worry about the Isser Eshes Ach. If there is Yibum, so then he could do the Yibum. If there's no Yibum, then he's mutter to them anyway. So there's no issue. The only possibility is if he were to do chalitza if he were to do Yibum to one of them, and he is not a brother of those, and instead there is a different brother. So in that case, you have to have chalitza. So let's go through it slowly. So if he dies without kids, so one of the two sets of brothers are his brothers, therefore they could both do Yibum, but they have to have chalitza done by the other one first. So one set of brothers, one of the sons of one of the potential fathers has to do chalitza, and then the other one could do Yibum. On the tzad that the one who's doing Yibum is the rightful brother, so the chalitza was nothing, and then they did Yibum, it's fine. On the tzad it was not the brother, so at least the rightful brother did chalitza, and it's okay. Now, if they die without kids, so then he could do even more chalitza. There are no other brothers. We're assuming we're talking about a scenario where there are no other brothers, so there's no issue. So he could do yibum or chalitza to both sets or to either set, whichever one he wants. Now, if the two potential fathers, if one of them is a Kohen and one of them is a Yisrael, so now we don't know if this boy is a Kohen or a Yisrael. We don't know who his father is. So he has all the halachas of a Safek Kohen, Safek Yisrael, like we saw earlier. So he has to marry a woman who is kosher to kahuna. He's not allowed to be metame to mesim. If he is tame, if he does become tame, he does not get malchus. He'd only give malchus where there's a for sure iser, there's a vade iser. He does not eat truma. If he does eat truma, he doesn't have to pay the kohanim for it, because, like we said, all the halachos of Safek are isurim or machmir, but as far as money, he gets to keep his money unless somebody could prove that he owes it. So he doesn't have to pay kohanim for what he ate because he might be a kohen. He doesn't get a right to take truma because he can't prove that he is a kohen, but his own truma he's allowed to sell and he's allowed to keep the money. He doesn't get a part of karbanos. He doesn't have to give up his own karbanos. He could be a mark of them himself. Rashi earlier said that's referring to his bachar. He doesn't have to give zor l'chaim and keva to kohanim when he has his own bachar. So it's his property. He doesn't have to give it to a kohanim. He cannot be mark of it and eat it as a carbon because he might be Yisrael, and therefore he has to wait until it gets a mum. Then we give him the chumras of kohanim and chumras of Yisraelim. That's referring to the kmitza, the carbon mincha, like we just said. Now, if they're both kohanim, which this following should also apply if they're both Yisraelim, some of these, if there's no issue of Kohen. So now the Mishnah first discusses what happens about Hilchas Onein. Onein is the restrictions that apply to, Kohanim specifically as far as Karbonos. So there's certain chumras when somebody's an Onein that is a close relative has died. So l'chumra we assume that he's the son of both of them. So if he dies, both fathers have to keep the halachas of an onein. If one of the fathers dies, either father, he has to l'chumra keep the halachas and the restrictions of onein on them as well. As far as tuma, he cannot be metame to them, and they cannot be metame him. Of course, Safek, maybe they're not his son, and he's not maybe he is not their son, and they're not his father. As far as inheritance, neither of them give an inheritance to him, because the other inheritors could say, prove that you're an inheritor of this man and you'll get anything. He can't prove which one he is, so they could all push him away. However, both fathers do inherit from him, unless he has other inheritors, of course, but both fathers do inherit from him if he has no other inheritors, if they are each the first in line, because they each are part of a suffix. Neither of them knows who the inheritor is, and therefore they split it. Now, as far as halachos to a father, cursing or hitting the father, that's forbidden for each of them. He's not allowed to curse or hit either of them. He is pater, doesn't have to make a carbon for either of them. And as far as doing the service of kahuna, so if they're both kohanim, as we said, so he can serve in the mishmar of each of them, but he does not get a chelik of each mishmar. So he serves on each of their shifts, but he does not get a part of whatever the shift is entitled to. If both men are from the same shift, then he gets one chelik, because he certainly gets a chelik either way. The Gemara begins with halacha of Shmuel, which seems to say that in order to do the avodah, a Kohen must know who his father is. It's not enough to know that he's a Kohen. The Gemara will challenge this. One of the challenges will be from our Mishnah, and we'll see if we can resolve it. So Shmuel says, halacha, if you have 10 Kohanim that are all standing in one spot, and then one of them leaves and he is Voel, and then he has a child, and we don't know which Kohen that was. So the ruling is that the child is considered to be a shtuki, meaning he's a suffix. Someone says, very funny, he's a suffix. What sense do you mean to say that he is a suffix? If you mean that he can't inherit anything from his father, of course he can't, doesn't know who his father is. Who would he inherit exactly? So the Gemara says, no, it means to say that he's a shtuki from the halachas of kahuna. He's not allowed to do the avodah as a kohen. What's the reason? So the Gemara quotes a pasuk that says, "V'hoisalo lazar acharav," that in describing kohanim, referring to Aaron, it says, "V'hoisalo lazar acharav bris kunas olam tachas hashakini le'logav v'chapar al b'nei Yisrael," referring to Pinchas specifically. So it says Zaro Acharav. You have to have a situation of Zaro Acharav. You have to know who his children are in order for the child to be able to do the avoda. Kahuna only continues and the right to do avoda to a child that certainly knows who is the Zaro Acharav, who is his father. So Gemara says that Rav Papa has a kasha on that. If you mean to tell me that the phrase Zaro Acharav means you know who the father is, so then elsewhere where that phrase appears, it should also be telling me something about you know who the father is. And it appears discussing Avram Avinu. It says Leos l'chal Elokim ulezarecha acharecha. So what's it meaning to say over there? That's know who the father is? Of course not. There isn't any halacha that could mean that because that was referring to Yisrael. There was no specific kahuna there. So what is Hashem saying exactly to Avram? Saying was zarecha acharecha. So the Gemara answers. He means to say this is another source of the halacha that one has to be careful not to marry an ovedes kochavim because the child goes with halacha of his mother, and if somebody marries a non-Jewish woman, his child will be a non-Jew. That's what it means to say zarecha acharecha. Make sure that your children should follow you; they should be Jews like you, and therefore you have to be careful not to marry an ovedes kochavim or a shevcha. Shmuel says, okay, now let's go to Akash and Shmuel's actual halacha. So Shmuel said that one cannot do avodas kahanim unless he knows specifically who his father is. Akash says we had a case where we had a woman who had a son, and she doesn't know if it was from her first husband or from her second husband. And there the question is she was falling to Yibum. So if the child was a child of her first husband, then her first husband did not die without children, and she doesn't have an issue of Yibum. However, if it's a child of her second husband, then her first husband did die without children, and she does have a mitzvah of Yibum. So we said there that there's no issue in the situation of the first child that's born. That's the one who's a suffix, because either way he's okay. If he's a child of the first husband, so then he's fine. He did not fall to Yibum, and there isn't any issue. If he's a child of the second husband, then the first husband died without children, and the second husband is the brother, and he did Yibum, so he's kosher either way. So the way it rules is, it says he's really is Kohen Gadol. He could be the Kohen Gadol. So the question is, what do you mean he could be the Kohen Gadol? According to Shmuel, he can't be the Kohen Gadol because he doesn't know who his father is. He doesn't know if his father is the first husband or the second husband, who's his brother. So the Gemara therefore says you have to limit what Shmuel said. Shmuel was only talking about a situation of znus. This issue is not a iser d'oraisa. Though we brought a pasuk that says zarecha acharecha, that was not a d'oraisa. That was only an asmachta on a d'rabbanon. Actually, you only have to have. You do not need this midoraisa. It's just a d'rabbanon din that you need to know midorabanan who the father is, and it was just hinting at it from the psukim. And the Rabbanan did not make the gzeira in a situation of marriage, where there was a kosher marriage to the first one and to the second one. There was no issue. The only issue was in a situation where there was a znus. That's where the Rabbanan made a gzeira that the child cannot do the avoda. So in that case, where she was married to her first husband, and then she legally married the second husband, either by yibum or any other situation, so there's no gzeira, and therefore that kid is kosher to be Kohen Gadol. Alright, now the Gemara is going to prove, though, that even in the case of Zus, there's still no Isser, and the Gemara is going to prove it from our Mishnah, the Mishnah which we just read earlier, the Mishnah which discussed the suffix of where the first husband, where the child, it doesn't know if he's from the first husband or from the second husband, and we discussed whether he could be a Kohen. If both were Kohanim, we said he's allowed to do the avoda. As a matter of fact, we said he does the avoda for both mishmaros. The Gemara is just going to prove that it has to be that these two husbands were not actual husbands. These two husbands were actually two issues. At least the second one was a case of zinus. Now, what are the possibilities? What could the two husbands be? Why did she leave her first husband and go into the second husband? So it could be that she was almana, that the first husband died, or it could be that she was divorced from the first husband. The Gemara is going to prove that both of those can't be, and therefore it's got to be his nus. Now, where do you see that it couldn't be that he died? So the Gemara says, if you notice, it says in the Mishnah, you could have a case where he's an onin for both of them. Now, how does it work out he's an onin for both of them? So this is not so bad. This we can answer. He's an onin to the second one. The second one could have died in his lifetime. The first one has to be dead before he's born, because we said that he was born in a case where it's a suffix from the first one and from the second one, because he left the first one, you want to say because the first one died, still possible that he has aninus to the first one, and that's if something happened to the grave, if there was a collection of the bones were scattered and was collected there, we redo the halachos of aninus even many years after he died. However, how could they both be owning to him? That's the next halacha there. They can't possibly both be owning to him, because if his mother only married the second husband because of the death of the first husband is not around while the son's alive in order to be an owning to him. So we can't be talking about where he died. Now maybe you want to say it's because she was divorced from the first husband. That can't be either. Because we also said that he can't be matami to them and they can't be matami to him. Now we understand they can't be matami to him. Neither one knows for sure that they are his father. So misafik, they cannot be matami to him. As far as him being matami to them, so I understand that he can't be metame to the second husband because maybe he's the son of the first husband, but the first husband he should be able to be metame to mimad of shach. If he's the son of the first husband, so it's his father, he can be metame to him. If he's the son of the second husband, well, hold on a second. The second husband was not allowed to marry the woman after she was divorced from the first husband because we said he's a Kohen. He's a Kohen, is not allowed to marry a Grusha. If he's a Kohen who's married to a Grusha, the child's a Chalal. A Chalal does not have any Isser Tumah. So then he should be allowed to be matami to the first husband either way. So it can't be that she was divorced from the first husband. What must it be then? It must be znos. She was still married to the first husband, and the second husband was not a real husband. It was just a situation of znos. Yet the Mishnah still ruled that he is allowed to serve in the mishmar of both of them. Kashran Shmuel, who said that in the case of znos, is Gzeirat Rabbanan, that he has to know who his father is. So the Gemara says, no, there's a fourth possibility. The Mishnah is not talking about where the first husband died or was divorced, or that it's talking about where there was a miyun, and that's she was a ketana and she walked out of the marriage. So the Gemara says miyun, ketana, walked out of the marriage. If she's a ketana, she can't give birth. We have a statement, we have a brisa brought of Bibi in front of Nachman. There are 3 women who are allowed to use contraception. Well, even though women normally are not allowed to, it's hashchasas hazera, but they're allowed to. And that's a woman who's pregnant, a woman who's nursing, or a woman who's a ketana. Pregnant because if she'll get pregnant again, it'll squash the first vlad. Nursing because it may deprive her of her milk, and the child, her living child, will die from malnutrition. And ketana, maybe she'll die because she cannot get pregnant and survive. Now, we said there specifically it depends what age she is. Under 11 years old, she can't get pregnant at all. From 11 to 12, she's going to die if she gets pregnant. So older than 12 is not a ketana. So you see that a ketana can't be pregnant and survive. So what are you telling me that is miyun? Because she can't be miyun because then she's a ketana. So the Gemara says that we actually have on the topic of ketana, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Rabbi Meir says that younger or older, she could do a regular tashmish, and there's no problem because she can't get pregnant or she'll survive and she'll be fine. The Chachamim say she doesn't need contraceptive, she could be fine, and Mishamayim Miracham, Shamayim will help. Either way, we see that a woman cannot get pregnant normally if she is a ketana. So the Gemara says there's a different type of situation. That could be that the Kedushin was a mistake, that she was married to the first husband and something was wrong with the Kedushin. It's Kedushay Tois, and therefore it was cancelled. That's what we mean by Mima Enes. And the Gemara shows that you see such halacha applies. We say in the Parsha of Sota, it says, V'hi lo nespasa asura, if she did an iser and she wasn't caught, she is also to her husband. But there's a different situation in which a woman is mutter to someone else and she's leaving her husband, and that's where there was a mistake in the Kedushin. Even though she has a child from her first husband, she's legally allowed to leave him and go to another husband because there was a mistake. So this Mishnah could be referring to when she left her first husband because of an error in the Kedushin or a Tanai that was not in the sky.